What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Dynasty Underdog. No Uri with us tonight, unfortunately. Power outages in the area, apparently, but I do have Jake here with me, which is very, very awesome. We're about to get into prospecting season. We'll talk a little bit about some of that as we head into it. But before we hop into the news and nonsense, how you doing, Jake?
Dude, I'm doing well. Kind of just like growing off of some amazing playoff games. Were those not some of the more
Those were some really good
entertaining,
games. Yeah.
divisional championship games that we could have gotten? It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The Baltimore game, oh, man, like just can't believe that it went down that way exactly. Just man, there's gonna be a lot of conversations about Lamar going into the offseason, a lot of conversations about Mark Andrews going to the off. It's gonna be a lot of stuff going on. Some stuff I think that we can take advantage of in terms of values, heading out of these games with like Mark Andrews, everybody basically just putting it all on him. He's going to take a value hit. So I think that they're, especially heading into like start of season, he could be a significant value. So just thinking about stuff like that. But yeah, man, some really incredible games. I'm excited for the next ones. But it was funny in the Discord I was talking about, I'd love to see the Lions win, but also I would really love to see Washington keep it rolling. And so like it was kind of a win-win for me in terms of like what I'm getting out of this as like entertainment and as a fan. But yeah, man, I think that Washington team is pretty much the story for me to watch. I'm very excited to watch them next week.
Yeah,
Or
same.
this weekend. Whatever.
It is really interesting being a Giants fan, seeing two NFC East teams in the conference final and being like, those two teams aren't that great in theory, but like truly the work that Washington has done throughout the entire season has been like spectacular. And if you think about both of their off seasons and how they basically impacted both sides of the ball incredibly positively, one of which came from the New York Giants, obviously. But I think the funniest thing is going into the off season, seeing the Dan Quinn hire, and then going into the actual NFL draft. Not a lot of people were openly excited about what was going on in Washington. I think they thought that this year was going to be kind of a learning / buffer year. The Cliff Kingsbury hire wasn't particularly well received in the community.
For sure.
Yeah. Like people were like, oh, that's not going to help Jaden at all. It's funny how a lot of things work themselves out in the way that they do. And, they thoroughly deserve to be where they are. And I will be rooting for them because fuck the Eagles.
Yeah. And we're going to talk more about Jaden Daniels in a minute here. But I do think it's very impressive what he's doing, at least year one, with kind of a lackluster cast. Like there's a couple guys there, but like Diami Brown and Olamide Zaccheaus being, high-end contributors is not what I think everybody had on their bingo cards heading into the season. So yeah, definitely unusual, but we are talking a little bit about, the divisional matchups that we just watched. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that real quick here. We don't have much news, but we do have nonsense. So we did mention the Buffalo Bills winning in interesting ways, obviously on the shoulders of Josh Allen. But I thought it was interesting just looking at, the box score even, the Buffalo wide receivers in this divisional matchup, one wide receiver with over 2 receptions. Keon Coleman 1 for 5, and Cooper had 0 catches, just 2 little highlights of that. Like, what's the explanation here? And despite the lack of success for, their first round pick and a really talented wide receiver in Amari Cooper, are we going to be interested in anybody they bring in next year? It's hard to get excited about this. I mean, even Kincaid, who was, a high draft pick for them too, not really doing much, for fantasy purposes or for, just producing for this team. So I don't know. How do you feel about this whole situation in general, I guess?
It's not overly exciting, to be completely honest. I do think that there is a lot to be considered. I think their general offensive scheme in general has been pretty productive for the running backs as a wide set. If you look at James Cook, I think a lot of people were pretty out on him coming into this NFL season. Ray Davis has had a relatively decent rookie season. I would say it's like super promising, but relatively decent. And then Ty Johnson, you mix all of that into Josh Allen being, as successful as he has been. I believe he still finished quarterback 3 or 2 in most scoring formats. So I think it's really just about understanding where the points are going to be coming from and what types of assets they might be acquiring. Like, by all means, if they do end up acquiring a true wide receiver one, I can see that most things will go through them. I know we, specifically probably the three of us, did think that Amari Cooper would find some of that type of target share. It unfortunately hasn't occurred. And I think a lot of that just comes down to just being able to adapt to the general game. I do think that they ask a lot more of their wide receivers off the ball. So specifically in the blocking game, that I don't believe that Amari has ever really had to do at this level and as consistently. And so maybe it's just generally exhausting for him to do over and over again, and then also run routes. I do think that he's also getting older, so maybe general stamina might be slightly more limited. He is just put into a situation that I don't think he typically has had to in the past. Last thing I will add is that we, specifically you and I, have been pretty out on Keon Coleman. So his general usage isn't all that surprising. You know, he was and currently is still basically a like no separation wide receiver. So he plays his physical wide receiver game relatively well, but this offense is more so about extended plays more often than not for wide receivers. And that's just not really his game. So when he's, 40, 50 yards down the field and he gets to go one-on-one up against a corner, good luck. That's usually kind of his game, but there isn't really that much separation gained by those types of plays for him that I've noticed. And I just don't really see him impacting the offense all that greatly. How do you kind of foresee this offense moving forward? Do you have any of the same takeaways?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a great breakdown, especially of those two profiles and like how it's worked out for them. But I think, kind of what you said and what Joe is saying here in our comments on YouTube, the 6-man O-line running game Buffalo is running is dominating, and it's true. And that may be like what you're saying with Amari, that might just not be what he's best suited for, what he's used to, might not have the stamina for it, because Buffalo is really built off of the running game, both from Josh Allen and from James Cook mostly, but in general, they're willing to kind of run any of those three backs when needed that they do have there. So I think going forward, the wide receiver one is not that important, whoever it is. Like, are they really going to be interested in investing a lot more in them when like Keon Coleman might get the job done in terms of getting coverage downfield, like, because that's a lot of what he's meant to do. Over time, he might, develop into the downfield threat they're looking for. They're very likely going to add some, a couple guys in the draft here and there. I don't think high draft picks, but I guess what I come back to in the end is I'm just a little more interested, I think, in Khalil Shakur after I see all this. It's like he seems to be a guy that they are willing to not run the passing game through, but he's definitely the target hog. And I mean, as long as he's there, I think that's kind of a position that Josh Allen really likes to utilize and is really comfortable utilizing, in the area of the field that he works. So, yeah, in general, I think that he's just a guy I'm going to be more and more interested in because I think his price is going to be fairly, palatable. And so they'll probably add a wide receiver. We'll probably all get excited about it as a community. And I'll probably just want more Shakir at that point is kind of what I feel like at the end of the day in terms of the passing game there. Otherwise, I'm just interested in the running game. And yeah, Dalton Kincaid, I don't think it's ever going to really get right for. He'll have those upside games. But yeah, okay. I just think it's so interesting because you don't often see really competitive and competent teams not have a usable or I don't know, like a real true wide receiver one. Like they don't have anything like that on this team that they at least use that way, right? It's not really a focal point of this offense, and it's very unique to it. Obviously, you see some of that in Baltimore too, but even they have added more to that wide receiver core to try to, I think, help that issue. It just doesn't seem to be much of an issue for Buffalo at the end of the day with their overall success. So, okay, we can get off of that unless you have anything else you wanted to add.
No, I was smirking because I was thinking of Baltimore, and the other team that I was thinking of was actually Green Bay, which is actually on the
Yeah,
other like
right.
antithesis of it, where there's so much wide receiver usage and tight end usage that it just makes it so challenging to actually understand where the ball will actually go. But yeah, no, I think that those are two really good examples.
Yeah, definitely. It's like very, very similar problem, but just totally different like
Yeah,
form
reasoning.
of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, reason.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. So, talking about Jaden Daniels, how well he's played in the situation that he's done this in. They obviously have a decent O line, but when it comes to the wide receiver core, the weapons, they're not all that special. Are we doing a similar thing with CJ Stroud, or I'm sorry, with Jaden Daniels that we did with CJ Stroud? Where we really kind of overhyped him heading into the offseason, QB1, he's over Josh Allen on keep trade cut, or he's right there next to him. Like, should we be a little bit more cautious and less optimistic, or is this a different situation in your mind?
I don't think it's necessarily a different situation, uh, but I do think that the general profiles of the quarterbacks lean to accepting that Daniels will score probably at a higher ceiling on a more regular basis, or I guess on a higher floor, if you want to put it that way, on a regular basis, due to the fact that he does have rushing upside. You don't really get that out of CJ Stroud. So even on poorer games, you'll still get rushing yards that will probably boost your score by somewhere between 4 to 6 points, which is pretty significant in quarterback scoring. So I don't necessarily have an issue from a points per game perspective, which I think in the grand scheme of things will have less variability for Jane Daniels' overall dynasty value. With that being said, I don't really believe, as someone who unfortunately did this, looking back, uh,
Yeah.
buying buying assets at their absolute peak just doesn't really make sense to me. So like I don't think that this is necessarily quote unquote the time to get into Jane Daniels. The time was probably after like week 1 or 2 where people were still skeptical or thinking that they were selling at a high. The next one is probably going to have to be, unfortunately, from either like a sophomore slump, to your point, maybe going into a slight decline from a week to week basis, or the other dreaded word that I always bring up, and I hate saying it because I feel like a fucking jinx, but an injury. Like, I think that those are going to probably be the best ways to unfortunately get into Jane Daniels. And I really do see, in both situations to be relatively positive for acquirers, because like I do think this is a great time to go buy into CJ Stroud. Like I do think
Mhm.
that these moments where these younger quarterbacks who have shown relatively high upside that have had weaker seasons or weaker weeks, those are the moments where you should be going to acquire. So that being said, like I wouldn't recommend acquiring Jane Daniels right now unless you can find the perfect deal for yourself. But I'm not overwhelmingly concerned or cautious
Mhm.
about my level of optimism around him. What about you?
Yeah, I do think it's a little bit different situation, mostly due to the rushing upside that's there. It really helps in terms of the points per game. But I agree that, and from experience, I know this, that going after any QB at the peak is really not the optimal way to acquire points in general. Like, if you like the player, like that's not why you should be acquiring him, to be honest. Like, I understand wanting to have Jaden Daniels, but like you got to be doing what's best for the squad, the fantasy team, the dynasty team. And so yeah, I totally agree that like I would not be getting into him. I just wonder, it's more like I don't know if I'd be getting out of him, because I do think that it's a little bit different than Stroud, unless it's like the perfect situation where like, you're tearing down one step to like, not even tearing down really, but like you're going maybe within a tier and getting plus or something like that, or maybe literally just one tier down and getting, a high end plus or plus plus on top of it, whatever that may be. Um, that I'm okay with, but like I just think the upside is there, and I think it might be a little different in sustainability in terms of at least fantasy production, regardless of if he regresses, because which he likely will regress in year 2. This is pretty incredible how he's playing. I mean, it's always possible that he progresses, but it's very likely that he regresses to the mean a little bit before maybe taking more steps forward in the future. So, yeah, but overall, I don't think we're doing the exact same thing, but we do really have to be cautious with how we view these because we can get over our skis a little bit. And with this one, I think if you go and try to buy him high, it's you're going to regret that. And that's just from experience, especially with because you never can get back what you give up, and it's just so hard to recoup those assets and the production that you generally have to give up for an asset like that. But real quick here, Iston in the YouTube comments, having a QB that can get a throwing and receiving touchdown makes it hard for the rest of the team. Comment about Josh Allen. Yeah, when they're doing everything, it definitely does make it tough, I guess, for the rest of the team to be productive. But still, I mean, even so, you see like Jalen Hurts with AJ Brown and Cohen. Obviously, they haven't been all that productive lately, but you've seen it really work where they're just as productive as any other team with their wide receivers and also have that rushing ability and all the rushing production too. And yeah, they've figured out a different way to work it right now for Buffalo. And I was talking about it a little bit in the Discord too, but Josh Allen's polish is super impressive, and it stands out when you watch him right up against Lamar Jackson face to face. It's just you can see how well he's able to take what's there and how decisive and accurate he is for the most part. Like he still obviously will, sling one way over somebody's head out of bounds here and there, and he'll throw one downfield just like Lamar did, and it'll be an interception. Like, and all QBs do that. But man, just like play to play, you just can see how dialed in he is and how it's just like pinpoint everything is, and he can see it all and everything. And so, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but it just seems like he doesn't need a high-end contributor or a high-end talent at wide receiver necessarily to get what he needs done. He's able to just do it with Mac Hollins and Khalil Shakur and these guys and almost do the Brady thing and keep it kind of cheap. And yeah, that might be the plan for them going forward. So, okay, enough news and nonsense. We can move forward real quick here. This might be a very fast one. I wonder if you have experienced this. And this is more just me trying to identify kind of like how my own biases, how I scout, and like what gets in the way of just clean evaluations. And I wonder if this happens to other people, but something to be cautious of, because I imagine subconsciously this definitely happens, because this is definitely how it started for me. But I have been trying lately, and I in the past didn't listen to that many evals during this time of year because I wanted to keep my own palate clean of like, other people's biases getting in the way of my evaluations. But even more so lately, I've found myself trying not to listen to evals from other analysts that I'm not a fan of, and when I say I'm not a fan of or I don't like, I just don't think that their process is as, is what I think it should be, or is, I guess, as polished as I think it should be. Or I guess I don't like their behavior, whatever it is. I mean, there's a lot of reasons you can not like somebody or their takes and how they say things, but one way or another, that can get in the way. So like if I'm listening to some of these evals from an analyst I don't like, sometimes I can wrongly, I think, go against that player in my evaluation, which obviously gets in the way of a truly good evaluation. And so I don't know if that's something you've run into, but like lately I've been staying away, try not to listen, just keep myself out of any of those issues. So yeah, I don't know. Thoughts on that?
Definitely. I think in general, this isn't even just about prospect analysis, but just general player profiles. If I find some type of analyst, content creator that is, making any type of commentary, I tend to already, this is probably an innate trait that I have. This isn't in any specific space. I don't know if people have caught on to this, but I have a strong defensive mechanism for whatever reason. And I think because I was an only child, my insides like almost like get heated. Like I can feel
it's
it. Like
both of us.
my face gets red and I'm just like, yo, fuck that guy. Whoever, like whatever their perspective is, it's wrong. Right. Like I'll never forget at some point last year, someone, came out and was like pretty hard on Dontavian Wicks while I was talking relatively positive about him on the show. And I had like a fucking like 250 word tweet in response to them, and I had to like calm myself down before I like sent it out. I do think that there is a lot of inherent bias that we place in terms of how we think others do the work that they're doing. And what I would say is, to your point, like removing all biases, whether or not they're positive or negative, from our process will probably make our process better from the early onset of us like gaining the general understanding of what a player is like. And then throughout the review process, once I've kind of finalized my own profile, I will then go
Then you go,
into other
yes,
perspectives,
yes.
other opinions, and then kind of use that to help guide me in the specific directions. Now, I do find that, and we had this
Confidently tell them why
conversation
they're wrong.
sometimes. I will say that there are people out there that understand other positions significantly better than I do. And we've talked about
Right,
this a lot
right.
actually on the show. We actually talked about this a little bit before the show. Like,
Mhm.
I will definitely value certain perspectives higher than my own, even if I don't necessarily agree with a lot of their quote unquote football takes, just knowing that they happen to have better perspectives about running backs or tight ends or whatever it might be. Like, understanding kind of like where my skill set still needs to continue to grow, understand like where kind of my own vision or understanding of the game has gaps. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's within the game itself. So, like, tight ends is a great example. My general blocking understanding, probably not at a very, very high level. And so, you know, going towards someone else who has greater expertise in that, I tend to I tend to listen to. I tend to read into like a lot of former player evaluations of tight ends specifically. I find that to be particularly helpful. But more importantly, I just wanted to bring up the fact that this does happen. Yes. Two, I think the best way to mitigate it is to go at it basically without those external pressures beforehand. And then once you've already kind of defined your own opinion, then bring in both the people that you agree with and the people you don't typically agree with, so that you can have a better holistic perspective of what a player profile should be by kind of, the start slash mid April period, so that you're ready for the NFL draft.
Yeah, I definitely think you have to go at it solo at the beginning. You can compare notes as you go. I think it's a good way to do it. If you have somebody you trust, like, and as much as I like Waldman, I'll stay away from his stuff too. Like, I'm not trying to taint my pool with that either, and be like, oh yeah, I like this guy too because this guy, like, it's like I try to stay away from both. It's not just analysts I like. I guess I framed it that way because honestly, I feel like this is something I did with Bucky Irving last cycle. Um, and regardless of what anybody else is saying, you should just make your own, fresh analysis, and you should have that without having it tainted. Which is kind of hard to do. Like, everybody has biases, no matter what. Like you just said, like we really do. It's funny. We have the only child syndrome. It's like, no, it's true. It's like we're oversensitive, and it's like you don't play well with others, and you're so you're like, that guy said that. No, 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 no. We're going the opposite direction. You got to fight against that a little bit, at least for me. And so I wanted to put it out there in the ether. It will help me remember it and try not to do it. So prospect peer pressure. Try to stay away from. Try to stay away from it. Try to stay away from it. Okay, cool. Market price board. This is a fun conversation. So the act of presenting your players as physical and concrete prices to leagues ideally create faster negotiations. So I think, and Jake, you could take this wherever you want to go after this, but this is kind of in relation to we were putting out, like in Sleeper, or I guess on your trade bait, wherever MFL, putting out your specific prices for a player, changing the nickname and saying, this guy for a fourth is my automatic accept. I think that's what you're referring to. And I've had some success with it. I've seen you've had quite a bit of success with it. I think my initial comment I'll just say is, like, if you're going to do it, the most successful way to do it and actually get things done is if you're willing to put a price there that is just at or right below market. You will get a lot more deals done that way than if you actually put what you really want. But so yeah, Jake, where did you want to go with the market price board?
Yeah, no, I think that kind of was it. And one of the reasons that I actually had on the sheet was because all three of us, I believe it was Uriah in DU2, I believe it was yourself in DU3, and maybe League of Legends, and myself in DU2, all kind of experimented a little bit with this process.
Mm.
We've done it in the past in other leagues, but we all kind of have done it over the last 10 to 14 days in those 3 leagues specifically. And so I was just kind of curious, from your most recent experimentation, your most recent experience, like what it was like. Did you find that people were,
People
coming
laughed at me,
in?
Jay. People laughed at me.
Did they?
They did. Yes,
Was it
they
just
said,
me?
No, 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 in the league chat, X player for a second, and it's like, I'm like, yeah, all right, whatever, bro. Like, I guess. So I'm realizing that if you're gonna do it, like, it's much better to do with players that you're willing to take at or under value, because you
Mhm.
will get deals done like that, I think, and also, you won't get laughed at. No, but mostly you'll get deals done, and people aren't going to think, like, oh, all these players you just put out here are overpriced, and that's kind of where this person is at. So I think it can be a little bit like to your disadvantage in terms of people coming to you for these players, because now you've put a price that they're not comfortable with. So you may have to like just change that at some point if you realize that that has happened. Update it and like go at it again maybe in a month or so, or in a couple weeks, like whatever you think it takes. But that was my experience with it. The only deal I got done was in, I think I did it in all the DU leagues, and I think in DU1 maybe I got off of Amir Abdullah for a fourth, and I'm like, okay, yeah, like this works. I'm rebuilding anyway, but he's also 30 plus years old. It's like, yes, like, yes, what are we doing? So but like I think it's very useful for those kind of deals. If anybody's willing to bite, you'll get those bites generally. So yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And there's someone who does like a really interesting job with this. Shout out to NWO Joe. I think in the
Mm-hmm.
comments, he's actually Lefty Joe F. Uh,
Yep.
he tends to put in almost like a max cost for an individual player, and then has other players available within the what I'll call the market price board or the auto accept board, and be like, these are pluses. So like, here's a free 2-for-1, basically.
Oh
Like you
yeah,
can
yeah,
you can
yeah.
take, let's say it's Ben Sinnott, and I'm telling you Ben is a
The
second.
clearance strategy. The
Yeah, and
clearance
it
strategy.
makes a lot of sense. And I have seen him do that relatively successfully. I find
Yes.
myself, whenever I'm going through the process, because I'll typically do it kind of like across multiple leagues at once, I'm not as creative. Like I'll just
Mm-hmm.
basically do like flat rate costs for individual players. And I find it to be beneficial, but I don't necessarily learn as much from my league mates as I want to during those processes. If anything, I can pick up on tendencies, and I think that's really helpful. Like, I do think that there's a specific member of our DU2 league who I won't shout out, but he really likes vets, and he really likes vets that he thinks he can acquire for cheap, and he's done that basically his entire time that he's been in the league. And it has been successful for him. He just won the league last year, right?
Yeah, I
So,
was
or
gonna
this
say,
past
didn't he
season.
just win? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, but I
yeah.
will say that it's almost at this point like fetishization. Like it's kind of getting ridiculous. Like I'm like, that team is borderline like, you know, A or P. Like you're gonna have to start getting like an all liquid diet for half your team members. It's pretty uncomfortable. But regardless, I do think that I have seen some success from it. We'll talk about actually a couple of trades at the end of the show that I got done through it. But I do think that it also puts you into some precarious situations as well. And that's the last thing I'd like to talk about it, is that when you do set these prices, like being honest with yourself and being honest with your league mates about kind of like when certain offers come in, if you're not necessarily like on your phone at all times. That did happen to me in one of the leagues where I got, I think, 3 offers for Cooper Cup, and they differentiated by like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 picks, something like that. And in my mind, I wanted to be selfish and just take the highest pick, but I knew that it just didn't feel right, because the person who sent me that offer first was really the person who should go ahead and go get it. And like, I end up probably losing out on like maybe a third in value by going for like the 210 over the 207 or something along those lines. And it kind of sucks. But I did feel like in some weird karmic universe, I was doing the better thing. And so, that was definitely a weird and precarious situation. And all I would say is that if you are ruthless, like go out and do your ruthless thing. For me, I found it pretty difficult to be incredibly ruthless during those moments when people are basically sending you the same exact offer across the league. So just something to be mindful of.
Yeah, no, I hear that. More often than not, I think the answer is to be ruthless in this game we play. But I think that's a very generous thing that you did. But Joe, BOGO sales, absolutely. Definitely. I think I've seen you do that before. I've seen you say it exactly like that. Like it is a retail shop that you are putting a sale on, and I've seen it work for sure. I could barely focus at the end of that because you were talking about the age fetish, and then I tried to look up what the word for old like an old person fetish was, and it's just such a funny word that I could not possibly say it.
Can you please put it on the screen?
I would prefer not to.
Okay, fine.
I don't know what that would do to the reputation of the podcast.
Yeah, we'll have an age restriction on the live stream moving forward. Okay, got it. The
Oh my
last
goodness.
question that I did want to bring up is: do you find that it undermines the value of the market within the league itself when other managers are doing this type of tactic, like setting aside a price for certain tiered assets, whatever you want to consider those tiers? So, for instance, I think a good example would be like James Conner. If I went out and said that James Conner is worth, let's say, early second, does that undermine the value of other running backs that are in that general same tier that maybe people are trying to get a late first for?
I think only if the deal gets done, which we've talked about most of the time, that basically like resets a market on a certain type of player. So I think most of the time it would have to be the deal is getting done. I think maybe if you're doing it with like Jamar Chase and you're setting a price like on like a very high end player in a very specific tier, like that might shift people's thinking on like, oh, okay, what can I go get CD Lamb for? Or you know what I mean? If it's like maybe a good price, let's say on somebody's trade bait, you're like, oh shit, well maybe CD Lamb is around that price too, or maybe XY, you know what I mean? So like maybe it would impact like that. But I do think that often like these prices probably are forgotten pretty quickly from the rest of the league managers after they look at them. Maybe there's an initial reaction in effect, but I don't think it's a long-term impact from the trade bait or the trade. Yeah, however you're doing this, renaming the players and sleeper and all that. So yeah, nice guys finish in the middle per AJ.
Oh,
so
that's good if you're in a threesome, I guess.
It's still one more carefully curating the information you process is important. Definitely agree. It helps to find people that only look at statistics and validated film findings rather than their opinions on these points. Yeah, you obviously want to find, I think, the most knowledgeable people you can. Bottom line.
Your best resources are the ones that are good. Got it. Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks, Billy.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
The ones that are honest and good.
Okay, fair. Honesty is challenging.
There's a lot of people out there who are dishonest and decent.
I'm indecent.
I think it's harder to find honest and good to very good people who do especially what we try to do, which is evaluate players publicly, put out every detail of what we're looking at and try to talk through it and make the best decisions. So yeah, that's that. But I do think market price board is a great conversation. Love that one. We've been put into practice a little bit, have seen some success. I think that it can work, but you need to be very tactful about it and just apply it in the right situations. Tactful.
Yeah.
Tactful about it. Okay. Coaching changes impacting former teams. Man, there's going to be a lot of coaching changes. Just a lot of coaching stuff going on. I mean, we already saw, it sounds like Josh McDaniels is going back to New England, which is going to impact, how Drake May develops there. There's a lot of stuff going on all over the place. Obviously, Mike Vrabel, we don't really talk about each piece of that kind of news that comes up on this pod, but we know how important the coaching and scheme changes are as these guys head to new teams. So definitely important to talk about this first point here. A lot of hype around Ben Johnson's move to Chicago. Is that's not done, is it?
It is. He showed
It's
up
done? That was done?
Yeah, he showed up
Oh,
in the
wow.
front office today, actually, and said hello to everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's huge. Yeah, that's massive, obviously. Caleb Williams we've talked about this. I think that he had a pretty decent season regardless of, the narrative. And so inserting Ben Johnson here where there's been just absolutely abysmal coaching for years and years and years is a great idea. And also the fact that he's coming in and taking on this kind of quarterback, I think is really beneficial for both parties, for him and for Caleb. I think it's going to be a pretty good match. I mean, we have seen guys like this not succeed, so there's always that concern. But I mean, also just seeing what happened with them in the divisional round, getting booted, like you might be concerned, well, if that's what happened. But I think it's, Jared Goff also threw quite a few picks and there was a lot of turnovers. Like there's only so much the coordinators can do. So I wouldn't put that all on him and be that concerned about it. So yeah, I think the move over there is very interesting. And I can imagine that we're going to see a complete scheme change, like a completely different scheme than what we've seen in the past here, which wasn't all that advanced and just not very successful. So I don't know. How do you feel about Ben Johnson moving over to this situation?
I honestly don't have that many thoughts with regards to Ben Johnson's move. Honestly, I was actually more so curious about his impact of leaving the Detroit Lions more than
sure.
His impact in Chicago. And that isn't because I don't think he'll be successful in Chicago. It's just more so there's so much minutia that I think that we end up like not understanding, especially like going in this early with general head coaching hires, that I think it's a little too early for me to understand how effective he'll be in this role. Like, for instance, I do find that a lot of people who move into these basically like organizational management roles, they don't really know how to be great managers sometimes. And we've seen, to your point, maybe Josh McDaniels could be one of the best examples. Fantastic in a almost like middle manager role, but not very good as, a CEO or a general like global thinker for the entire organization. It's almost like that ego power aspect really negatively impacts his brain and his functional ability to help the team around him. So I think for me, it's really about the things that we know that could get negatively impacted or can get impacted in general. I don't know if it's going to be negative. The entire Detroit team as a whole seems to be probably going to be picked over pretty well from a coaching perspective. I believe they're going to be losing one of their offensive assistants as well. He'll be getting a promotion. I believe Aaron Glenn will be leaving as well, probably to the Jets. And so how does that general like trickle down have on an entire team? Like, are we looking at the Detroit Lions as potentially one of the most exciting offenses in 2024 moving into 2025? Like, are we scared of owning, a Jared Goff, Amon-Ra, J-Mo, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Sam Laporta? Like, those are all six of those players are relatively enticing pieces in a dynasty landscape. Like, how do we think about how those changes kind of impact their value?
Yeah, I mean, I think they do benefit from having continuity in the players, right? Like in the actual supporting cast and Jared Goff, like they're all going to likely be very similar, if not exactly the same, at least the key cogs. So, I think that from that perspective, it really helps them keep things together there. But I also hear, the name is slipping my mind, but there's a couple different coaches in that offensive coaching staff, from like the quarterbacks coach and I forgot, there's like a billion different coordinators at this point, but there's a couple of them that have gotten some pretty high praise, and I would imagine that there's some succession plans, at least for this first move. I'd be more concerned about if a couple years down the road, when there's some free agent moves with the current players and all that, and the coaching staff again maybe gets into the cycle of head coaches. It's kind of the Patriots thing. It's like you can only survive so much or so many coaches departing like that. So I mean, I kind of think that this team is a little better suited to handle maybe the loss of Ben Johnson. They also have a really strong coach in Dan Campbell, which I know, like, we don't love to think of the human elements of everything, but he is a great leader, and that's important. And I think he's been able to find talented coaches, and who knows, maybe him and the GM there, who are great talent evaluators, might be really good talent evaluators from a coaching perspective too. So got to give him a chance, I think. And also knowing that the continuity is there with the players, I'm not super concerned about them from a fantasy perspective going forward. It would be really, really crazy to me to think that whoever takes over internally would vastly change the scheme and what they're doing there, and negatively impact what's going on. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, I have basically similar thoughts. I just find that the conversation is really unique because when there are major changes in other teams, for instance, like we were talking about like Chicago, like everyone's going to be so excited about the impact of Ben Johnson. It's almost like folks forget that Ben Johnson, this offensive coordinator turned head coach that we're so excited about, is leaving a team. Like that's going to have some type of impact. I don't know, and I can't tell you what that impact is going to be, but it is going to have some type of trickle down effect. It reminds me a lot of the conversations that occurred in Buffalo when the Giants hired Brian Daboll. It reminds me of the conversations that occurred when Mike McDaniel left to Miami. Like these things obviously happen very frequently, and yet people get replaced, right? Like Robert Saleh got replaced by D'Amico Ryans and ended up being an incredibly talented defensive coordinator that got himself a head coaching job right after that, right? So it's like people get concerned about these moments, but I would say, to your point, I do think that a lot of this is kind of embedded into the team itself. So like even if, let's say, the scheme isn't necessarily as effective or as efficient next year, I think it will be, a marginal decrease in terms of general production. And it won't be something that we're going to be feeling across the wavelengths of impacting Amon-Ra, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, J-Mo, David Montgomery, and Jared Goff, etc. Whoever else they might add, who knows? Maybe they'll add finally a wide receiver 3, or it will be Tim Patrick again. That'd be really sexy. So yeah, I think all in all, that's kind of just very high level. And I know it's a hard thing to talk to. Just kind of wanted to think about it as probably these positions start to get filled and we start diving in a little bit more about who's going to take over, the offensive coordinator role, the defensive coordinator role. Will it be internal? Will it be external, etc.?
Yeah. Awesome. It's like just thinking about, I feel like coaching and scheme is highly, highly important. Don't want to diminish that, but I feel like the players can more often survive without the head coaches, or without the coaches in general, than the coaches can survive without the good players, if that makes sense. We've seen that all over the place. Bill Belichick may be the most stark example of this, where it's like you see Tom Brady go and have success somewhere else with, albeit good head coaches and good coaches, but not, I mean, he literally brought everything over, the culture and everything. And it's like you see things fall kind of away for Belichick, though still holding things up with, his ability to scheme on defense and get these players. There's a lot of it. Obviously, you can just see it happening. Not saying Belichick's a bad coach or anything, but he would even say it's the guys on the field that matter the most. And so that's kind of how I think of that conversation a little bit as well. And yeah, you can give me a good tongue lashing for not noticing at the beginning that you're talking about impacting former teams. It literally says it in the headline of our segment here, and I'm talking about the Bears. So yeah, good stuff. Okay. Are you ready for startup season? That's it. We are the degenerates. We are the
We are.
absolute degenerates. It's
It's
funny.
it's my fault.
It's. I mean, yeah. We can blame it on Jake. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Uh, what did we just hold on? Hypothetically, you're doing a startup next week, and hypothetically, you can draft 2025 picks. When are you looking to start grabbing them? Oh, that's us. That's our league. I just I didn't realize that we are drafting DU5, our fifth listener league, in a week or two here. And yeah, so when would we grab 2025 picks? Oof, man, I feel like I need to sharpen up my own rankings before I hop into this new startup draft that we're doing here. I'm trying to think. I don't think I would be as highly motivated to reach on them as I typically would be. And even then, I generally feel like I just like wait for the value ones and get like the late first round picks and nab a couple of those. And that's most likely what I'll be doing with this class is kind of gauge what the room is feeling on them, especially in terms of when they select the 101 or whatever, and then from there I'll get a really good idea of like, okay, when do I need to be ready to take the 108 through 112 kind of picks, and if I have back-to-back picks, which I do,
Wow.
I
Okay.
will be selecting multiple. I will probably be selecting multiple if I can, if that can happen. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you have a specific area of when you'd be selecting those 2025 picks? I can probably give a more solid answer here in a second.
There's just so people are aware, if you're in a 12-team league, there's 48 picks. So I don't know how to best work through this exercise, but I guess for me,
where would you start taking the 2025
yeah, I
picks?
think I think the 101 is probably touching the end of the second round. I think it's probably somewhere in like the 22 to 24 range for me. I think ADP right now on Dynasty Data Lab sits at the 21st overall, so that is the 209. I think that's a little early, honestly. Like
I do
I
too. I think
I
I'd be more towards like the 40th pick, but probably in between.
wow, 40th. Jesus.
Not, I wouldn't be that far down, but definitely more like the
Yeah.
34-ish range, like
Yeah,
34 probably.
I think that seems relatively reasonable. Around
Yeah,
there, you could still get Kyler Murray. I think I'd probably still go Kyler over Janty. AJ Brown at
right,
34.
right.
Funny enough, that is the gap though. So the 102 sits there at 35. I think that's still a little high for me. I probably have,
Mhm.
yeah, like I said, the 101 probably sits somewhere in the 22 to 24 range. And then the 102 is probably sitting there right after the end of the third round. So touching the fourth, I think I'd still probably rather a Jonathan Taylor, Sam Laporta, and probably 0.75 tight end premium. Bucky Irving, I probably would rather over
Over
maybe.
what?
No, I think I'd still probably
Over
go
what? The
102, I was
102?
gonna say.
Yeah, I'd
But
take the 102 over Bucky
yeah,
personally.
same.
Yeah.
Brock Purdy, that's probably touching it for me. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, Brock
Yeah, that
Purdy and
103 range for sure. Like we're out of it by then. Like I'd
yeah,
much rather a lot of vets, I think.
it's an interesting group. But yeah, then the gap there, and that's I think a pretty common tier break. I would say
Hmm.
in the general public is that 102 to 103 range. Probably jumping a whole another rounds. There's guys like T. Higgins in that group, Rashi Rice, Jared Goff, that I want all before
Oh
that
my
pick.
goodness, yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to say the least. But I think that's kind of where my mind is at. Uh, oh, the,
No Brock slander. No
no,
Brock slander.
Brock
I
is
mean, we're definitely
not getting
taking him in that
slandered.
range. Yeah,
Yeah,
like if we're
yeah.
taking him at like
I,
103 for sure. I'm
I
taking
literally
him then.
acquired Brock for like fucking peanuts a couple weeks ago. I promise you, there's no Brock slander here. It's just more so about understanding, I think, where you can kind of get these values. And truth be told, to Billy's point, I almost prefer when these rookie picks go earlier. I do find that specifically in startups, they tend to move faster when they do go early. And that's usually when I can acquire relatively positive veteran ADP when I need to kind of fill up actual positions instead of concerning myself moving forward with God knows what, what the fuck is going to be there at the 103. I don't need to concern myself about the 103 anymore. I actually have a legitimate QB2 already in my team. I have hopefully, 2 elite wide receivers by then. Like maybe the build is already looking pretty successful. I don't know. I don't have to worry about myself, but absolutely, I promise on the show, no Brock Purdy slander and definitely no Brock Bowers slander. Double Brocks. I'm all in. But this Sunday, I do have a startup going. Technically, it's a DU adjacent league. It is a best ball dynasty league that is being started, which I think was actually the question at hand. And I do think that my answer will change specifically for best ball startups, just because with the 101 being a running back and in a league where you do get points per first down, I think it does actually boost the 101 just slightly. That's all I'll say. But how are you feeling? Like, how are you feeling about startup season? Do you feel like you learned, engaged, kind of like where things might have went wrong last startup season? Are you just generally excited about kind of new player profiles that you've gained on certain dudes that maybe you were off of going into the season? Like, where's your head at?
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like over the last 2 years, probably I've honed in my strategy, which isn't all that rigid, but I feel like I've just honed in kind of a way that I like to view and approach drafts. And so I like there's always things that you can do better, of course. And there's definitely like there's some picks, I think, in like honestly some of the double digit rounds where there's like a lot more established or guaranteed picks that I could have made, and it was kind of taking maybe some shots that didn't need to be taken, and so some of that stuff I would probably change. But it's yeah, there just wasn't that much necessarily I would look back on and be like, I need to do this differently. But every draft is different anyway. Like I just ended up having pretty solid success in like I think the 3 startups that I did, in how they turned out, and then how the season went. Like in general, they were pretty solid. And so this could go totally different. Like I only have 1 startup. I'm trying not to do too many. I probably will try to keep it at 1. Maybe if something else really awesome pops up, then that'll happen. I'm actually probably there's probably a league or 2 closing down, probably a league or 2 that's being left, which we may just have a conversation about leaving leagues in a week or 2 here. But I'm excited. I'm super excited. I love startup season. I love startups. But it is kind of overwhelming at times, like, because for me, I really want to be super prepared for it. My startup is DU5, which has some unique scoring settings. So I feel like I really need to prepare myself in terms of just looking at where value should be, how I want to approach that, think of kind of some of the different iterations of things that may happen in the draft and how to react to those things. I like to try to plan ahead. And especially once I get into the draft, things start flowing. I think that's when you can really start thinking 4 or 5 moves ahead of like what you want things to look like if optimally constructed for you in that draft, and how you would change or how you would adjust your approach if XYZ were to happen, if all the players you want are gone, those kind of things. So I mean, that's how I approach a draft anyway. So leading into this next one, like that's where my mind is at, is just kind of prepping, thinking about different scenarios and all that. But mostly I'm excited. I mean, yeah, there's a little anxiety that goes into it, but very, very excited for startup season after a very long and what felt like a slog of a season with all the injuries. But how are you feeling about the startup season? I know you have, I think, 2 coming up.
I do. I have 2. I think those are going to be my only 2 for this offseason. I don't know why I made a face at you for saying that you're only doing 1. I do
Yeah, I felt
agree.
shame. It's like a whole different kind of dynasty peer pressure. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I don't want to be alone. But yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing, and you actually hit the nail on the head with your analysis of just like past startups, is really looking into that late round draft value. Like I'm already looking at ADP in some of the later rounds for just like a standard super flex draft. And it's like, I know for a fact, like I would be in the headspace in the past of going like Audric Estime over Aaron Rodgers. And like, there's just no need. Like, like There's just no need to do stuff like that when the general ceiling play there is clearly Aaron Rodgers, and it just doesn't really make any sense for a general roster build to go anywhere else, because the worst case scenario is that you have a clear top 15 to top 17 starting quarterback on your team that, even if it's your QB 3 or 4 in the 19th, 18th round of a startup, like, you just go out and you get that, right? And I do find that myself being just kind of like unnecessarily quote unquote heady, and instead it's just stupid. I just end up being dumb. So trying to figure out where those types of values are and where they live, because there's a ton. Like, that's like been my new thing, is just like looking in from basically around 15 to about 20. After that, it's kind of bad, although it's crazy. Deshaun Watson sitting there in round 21 at the 2102. So, there's definitely, I'm not going to condone drafting Deshaun Watson, but I feel like at that value, it just doesn't make any sense not to just go out and see who knows what can happen with the man with a completely shattered Achilles and a terrible heart and a terrible brain, and every other part about him is just fucking awful. But regardless, that is kind of where my head has been at, is just kind of understanding where I've been very inefficient in startups. Like, I do find that, unfortunately, a lot of my value in this game comes post startup, after I've dug myself a giant fucking hole. So I would love to just start at like equilibrium with everybody else, instead of being like, oh yeah, I've got this team with all these hype meme fucking idiot players that will have no value. Instead, I just have legitimate players that will score points. So I think it would be really good for me to actually be doing a best ball league startup before, just so that I have kind of a gauge of players that will actually score points, instead of players who may not touch the field at all in 2025. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Keaton Mitchell. But yeah, I think that's kind of where my head is at. And I love Keaton Mitchell, by the way. I just think that he's like prime example of someone that I would like go out and get over like a general point scoring player and end up with someone who scores, 45 points next season
and has no value. Yeah. Totally. No, I totally get that. I also think, make sure if you have a startup coming up, like, go try to do a mock draft with as similar settings as possible. I do think, I know you did a DLF one that John Hogue sets up, and those are always really good. There's a lot of places to do them, but I would definitely recommend doing that. I think it's very, very helpful. Just like Jake's saying, even doing the best ball draft, getting a gauge of the market right now is super, super important, because then you'll always find things like, wait, that's where that guy, okay, hold on, let me rethink like where I can pick my value from. And so very, very helpful doing that. Just thinking back, as an example, last year, I feel like this was double digits, but it was close if not. In a 0 running back build, I was trying to flex in our League of Legends draft and and do the 0est of 0 running back builds, which worked out until the finals, funny enough. But I went Dontavian Wicks over a running back. I feel like in a spot where I could have easily just filled a hole that I may not have had to give up a second to fill later on, for a player who, it was all question marks and hype and theory and nothing concrete. It was all flashes. And so it's just one of those players you're trying to extract this value from, like Jake's talking about. It's a very Keaton Mitchell-esque type profile where you're like, there's so much there. I'm going to take him over that guy and be smart, and it's like, no, the smart thing would be taking another guy over this guy and getting this guy for a value after the draft, like Jake's talking about, because we are generally pretty good about that. And so I think maybe flipping the approach is the appropriate way to do it. Find a cheap way to get into it after the draft, because the draft is it's just a very limited value. Like, you can only do one thing with this pick. Like, and so you want to make the most of it, because this is your first chance at these players without having it be tainted by somebody's bias or any other values that, happen to be impacted by the league and the market, that specific league market. So, that's my thoughts on that, I guess. And Yeah, so startup season is crazy. It's crazy we're talking about startup season just after the season ended, but that is how us degenerates work and how this format works, and that's why we love it. So very excited to get going. I know you're getting going, I guess, in like this weekend, but I'm very excited right after the Super Bowl to get right back into it because it just keeps the football flowing. So stoked for some startups.
The only thing I was going to add is it's going to be my first ever 12-hour running clock with no stop. So we have
Overnight
three major time zone differences. So I figured with 12-hour running clock, it just doesn't have an impact, and then I don't have to worry about stop clock, people like falling out over those 8 hours, things like that. And I'm just curious to see like what the speed will be like over that process. So like I said, I think we have like majority of the league is probably Eastern Standard. I think I'm the only bum on the West Coast. And then we have in the YouTube chat, Iston, also known as Frank Bros in Discord. He'll be drafting out of Australia. And then we also have our buddy NFS football, not NSFW football. Our man Dan drafting out of the UK. So it'll be a lot of fun, just kind of seeing how that flows, because I've always kind of been relatively against the stop clock, and I think this is a good way to kind of get away from it, just because it's kind of tedious, and it's nice that the clock is always running. You don't have people being like, oh, can I send a trade during this? Can I make a pick during the top? Like, the clock is not moving. Can I do this? Like, if I hit the draft button, will the player be on my team or not? Like, do I have to wait? Like, I don't want to deal with
that. Did you try? Did you try?
You have to go through like the user process? Like, just like, do you not understand how technology works? Like, hit the button. No, okay, you didn't do that. So, not dealing with that, which will be really nice, and I will let everyone know moving forward, because I do think that 9-hour running clock for everyone that's like just on like US time could actually be the solution to 8 hours. Because if you think about, no one should be sleeping for 9 hours as an adult. It's like borderline impossible. So
yeah, I mean, I'm totally with these ideas because I think that it's very easy for anybody to check in every once in a while and just make their goddamn pick. I don't think it's really that big of a deal. But people, I'm working, I got this going on, I got that going on, so I need, whatever. So I think that's what you run into with it. I don't think it's like, ideally with a good group of people who are invested, like usually like with a DU league, if we have an 8-hour running clock or an 8-hour clock and we have a stoppage overnight, like usually they're humming. People are going to be making picks regardless. You know what I mean? And like they're into it. So they're there. And yeah, that generally isn't important. But I do think that for what you're talking about, 12-hour running clock makes sense because it should never be. First of all, everybody wants to be doing this and is probably pretty excited about it. So they're going to be really into the league and trying to pick whenever they can be picking. And also, there just shouldn't be a problem with the timing that you guys are working with there. So
there shouldn't be, but we'll see. I'm sure we'll run into a singular hiccup over the next couple of weeks, but hopefully it's just that. And yeah, just in general, excited. I always love running a league. I actually, for some reason, do actually like commissioning for the most part. I find that most of my leagues are pretty chill. I know how to typically select people based off of vibes. Billy loves to put together absolutely diabolical leagues with terrible human beings that fucking suck and are just like not fun to play with. So yeah,
I think I've put together leagues for the people. I think despite that, which I do think there is some of that, I think that I do a fucking great job managing that shit. All right, I think I do a great job managing this shit.
You do. You're good. You are a very, very good commissioner. I'm just giving you a hard time. You have one.
And I also think
you have one ding in your resume, and it's just one dumb league, and I hate that I'm in it.
Oh my god.
It's fine. I'm gonna win. I'm gonna win for the next 5 years in a row. So it's all good.
Yeah, that'll make you feel better about it, right?
Should have been a fucking Empire League. I wish I could have just ended it with winning.
Can we end this one? I do like to know that we are representing worldwide. You got the Australians, we got the the United Kingdom. We got everybody. We're going all around the world. I love that. It's really cool. Shout out to Dan and Isten and all those boys. I know we have like some Canadians in there too. Like they're all over the place. So shout out to
some
Floridians. Unfortunately, we are in there too. Yes, us maniacs. Yeah, we create quite a large population, I think, of the Discord, and that is probably why it is what it is.
Diabolical. Yeah.
Diabolical. Yes, absolutely. Okay, cool. Let's knock out some Dynasty trades. Yeah, let's knock out some Dynasty trades. So unfortunately, we don't have Uriah here because he has a humdinger I really wanted to get on him about. And so next week when he's on here, I will definitely be bringing that up and we will be discussing. But we got, I think, 5 here that we're gonna knock out real quick. So let's talk about this first one. We have Kyron Williams, Darnell Mooney, the 407 for Ricky Pearsall, Jameson Williams, and Pop Douglas. I remember seeing this trade go down. I forgot where it was. I think it was in League of Legends, actually.
It was.
Now that I'm thinking about it. And I just think it's like a kind of a funny trade. Like I don't love either side of it really, but I do fall on the Kyron side of it. Just he's the highest end asset, the highest scoring asset. And I think I understand the idea that the other side could ascend, but I think I could maybe get more out of the Kyron side than that. So I guess that's where I'm at. I'd probably try to just get out of Kyron for something better than the package that is Pearsall, JMO, and Pop Douglas. How do you feel about that, Jake?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is the type of trade where if you're able to get Kyron for this and you get lucky enough where the Rams don't draft another running back at like a relatively premium pick, which I don't think they will after they took Blake where they did last year, you end up finding yourself probably a pretty solid window from May until September of being able to get into Kyron's almost like peak value, right? Like he'll get almost an artificial bump based off of what people saw last season. I think this is a great trade if you're not actually looking to use Kyron. I do think that Kyron's like actual usage is, I know I said this before the season. I know I was wrong. We talked about it last week, but I do see this upcoming season, Blake will probably have a much larger role. I just think that the general efficiency just wasn't there from Kyron. So it isn't an asset that I necessarily want to be using myself, but I do think that this is a great way to get into Kyron without really getting any first round value back. Like you're basically sending away a bunch of seconds and a third for a first round value guy, plus Darnell Mooney, which hovers in around that probably early to mid second range anyway. So it seems like pretty good value to me.
Yeah, I like that. And I think, peak value, you're looking at trying to get out of Kyron for either a mid first or like a first plus, like a late first plus. And I think if you can do that, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable about that. And like Jake's saying, Darnell Mooney, maybe you can get like a second or, some package for him. And that then you've basically recouped everything plus. And so I like the idea of that. Okay, cool. So we can move on to Cooper Kupp plus Jake Ferguson. I forgot his first name. Cooper Kupp and Jake Ferguson.
He's that irrelevant.
I like Ferguson a bit.
I do too. I do too.
Yes, he has been irrelevant. So Cooper Kupp, Jake Ferguson for the 210 and the 212. 2 separate deals done back to back, same owner. So Cooper Kupp for the 210 and Ferguson for the 212.
Correct. And so I brought this trade in here because we were talking about the market price board. Before these two trades happened through the market price board, I stated, I believe, 25-26 second for Kupp and the same, I want to say, for Ferguson. Or I think I said any second actually for Ferguson. And that was more so just due to exposure. I think I have like 3 or 4 shares of Ferguson, and I was just like, oh, well, I just acquired him in another league, so I might as well try and get in or get off of him for a second here. And got these 2 offers back to back. I accepted both because those were the prices that I put out there. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think it's terrible. I think the Kupp one is like right on market, maybe just undervalued, but like honestly, with what we've seen from him, very, very understandable to just say, give me any second. So that one I'm totally comfortable with. I think Ferguson, I would probably demand like and I would probably have put him out for like, mid to early second or second plus. And I would have taken like, 212 and a third or something. Maybe I would have felt better about it, but it's not far off. So like, I can't kill you. But again, if you're like rebuilding or trying to get off players for share purposes, whatever you're talking about, like if there's a reason and you're trying to move off these guys, like there's no reason to haggle about, a percentage point in value. That could, first of all, just lead to you not getting the deal done, and then a further decline in value. And so if it's close, you may as well just take it and run. And so, yeah, I think I'd feel comfortable with what you did there. But, as we are kind of stingy and we like to press a little bit, I would like to do that. But given the strategy that you got this done with, I don't think you had the ability to do it because you said, this is my price. And so,
yes.
So you took it. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
No. And it makes sense.
Which goes into the negatives of the market price board. I do think that these auto accept deals,
which is why I go too high.
Yeah, which is completely
I don't want
fair.
to regret it.
Which is completely fair. I know for a fact I'm not going to regret either of those in the sense of like general process. I think obviously the return might feel light moving forward, and I do think that probably a full offseason with Dak, Ferguson going into contract year. We already talked about it. I acquired him a couple weeks ago.
Right.
I'm all in on that idea. It was just, it was one of those situations where I got in on him so cheap in that other league at like 2 late thirds that I was like, I'll take a late second and be happy with it because I wouldn't be able to get into that late second probably with 2 late thirds anyway. So it just made kind of sense. And then for Cooper Kupp, kind of crazy. We already saw like weird comments about him planning to come back for next year. Like this is just a general tape issue for me. And we talked a little bit about it in the Discord, but I've been watching some of his all 22. The dude just doesn't look right. Like, I don't know what it is.
He's not healthy. He's not healthy. There's no way.
And I just don't know if I'm willing to bet on the fact that he's going to just miraculously have a
full healthy season at 33.
A healthful year. I just don't see that in the cards, and I just don't see it in the cards now. I think I brought up a stat last week, but like him and Kenny Galladay have like the same number of 1,000-yard seasons. It really just puts in his perspective like how many seasons he's had that have been derailed by small injuries. It's just kind of a reality. I got in on him for basically a second at the start of last year. This felt like a good way to get off. Like I said before, I could have been more ruthless. I think I could have gotten either the 208 or 209 or 207, something in that range, instead of the 210. But I just went with the thing that was actually just going to get done. So I did it. And yeah, to your point, though, I'm sure that there was probably a third somewhere in those two deals that I could have done, especially if I would have packaged this together and just sent out the 210, 212, and especially because it was with the same owner, and a third, I think I could have gotten that deal done. But
I totally was thinking about that when you said that they were two separate with the same owner. I'm like, well, if you had packaged them, you could have added something on for sure, because it would have just looked like more. But yeah, you got to be ruthless and take the earlier pick.
Yeah, especially now. Yeah, especially now.
But that was very generous, like I said, of you. Okay, moving on. This is one I just thought was super interesting. Even in a 10-team, this is 10-team Superflex, PPR. But even in 10-team, I think it's interesting. So really, okay, so it's Jonathan Taylor plus Mike Evans for Rashee Rice. And what was interesting to me was that the large majority of the Discord voted for the Rashee Rice side.
It was split. It's split 50-50.
It ended up splitting. I ended up changing my vote because I voted. Well, no, and I'll explain because I was voting on I do think long-term Rashee Rice probably ascends to greater value than these two assets. So from that perspective, I think that it's a win, but I think it's a really overpriced cost for Rashee Rice given his current situation and everything that's gone on, the injury, the potential suspension. I made a trade in the league. It was a keeper league and values are different or whatever, but the reaction from the league was Rashee Rice is basically dead. You know what I mean? It was he's useless. He's going to be suspended. It's everything that you could possibly think of. And it's not the only place I've heard it. And you've also seen him traded for pretty low value over the last couple months. And so like to have to trade JT plus Evans, like someone in the Discord even said on Keep Trade Cut, JT is ahead of Rashee Rice. Why should you have to give plus on JT to get this done? Like that doesn't make sense at all. Like just given market values, like it just doesn't really make sense. And so I would do everything in my power to not have to spend what this cost on Rashee Rice, though I think Rashee Rice probably over the long haul is the asset you want, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's literally what I said. I think in response to it was something along the lines of, I'll read my own quote because I am a psychopath.
I didn't remember what your quote was.
It was value
I don't
probably
remember what you
leans
said.
the other way, but I'd still prefer to go Rice. So I looked this up on KTC. They're dead even. Jonathan Taylor and Rashee Rice. So you are getting a free Mike Evans in terms of value. Now it's really just going to be dependent of what you see those two assets kind of moving towards going into this upcoming season. I do find that values are really hard on these calculators postseason. I don't find that they accurately portray startup value because I don't think that they're going to be the same. I bet you in a vacuum, when you look up the startup ADPs, they're not going to be the same. So if I can actually probably just do this right now. Let's look. Rashee Rice is sitting, I'm looking at yellow. He's sitting 5 picks behind JT. So, you know, that, yeah. Okay. Thanks, CF Gordo. I was doing it. But yeah, he was 5 picks behind, it looks like. And I do think that still probably fits. That's probably like equivalent to a future second, which is, I think, about right for you to then acquire JT. So you're paying an extra second on the wrong side, basically. And I do understand that logic, but I do think that probably that will even out, if I had to guess, with more news with regards to Rashee Rice. If people find out that, you know, there isn't going to be a suspension, or if there is, that'll have a market impact. I think there's going to be a lot of learning to go on with Rashee Rice this offseason. So that will be interesting. But yeah, I do see, like I said, the value definitely leans on the JT side. And this probably, to your point, doesn't need to be done this way. You know, like, you don't need to do this. You don't need to do this. Like, you can do it any other way. Just don't do it this way. I don't disagree. I still think that the asset that I want the most out of that trade is going to be Rashee Rice. And in a 10-team league, depending on what my depth looks like, I'd probably be willing, and assuming that this is still relatively a low start, like if this is only start 9 or 10 in a 10-team, I probably lean Rashee Rice anyway.
Okay, cool. I just thought it was interesting because when I want to, okay, I'm not going to pay the price for what he's going to be in 6 months. I want to pay the price now. And like this is paying the price of the future instead of paying the current price, which sometimes you need to do. And I just don't think this is one of those assets you need to do it with, which obviously Jake just said, but I'm reiterating. Moving on, Justin Jefferson for Marvin Harrison Jr., 103 and a 26 first. It looks enticing, but I think that this is pretty clearly Justin Jefferson. The 103 this year is just not, in my opinion, enough to cover, the value gap between Marvin Harrison and JJ, and the 26 first, although a nice asset, unless I know that it's coming from a very, very depleted team. You know, it's just some question marks and an underwhelming rookie, high profile rookie, albeit for one of the best wide receivers in the game, who is coming off of kind of a down playoff run. So it's just not a really good time to sell JJ. But yeah, if I'm buying for that price, yeah, please give me JJ.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is actually in that that rookie league again. So last week I had that weird.
These trades. You made this one?
Yeah, I traded away JJ for this. God. So
God.
Yeah. I know. So
what is wrong with you?
I told you what I was doing. So
You're
what
doing too much for these people.
I'm not trying to rob them, honestly. It is more so about understanding the general experimentation of how to impact market, but also trying to uh, maneuver through picks and assets in likable ways. And I find that like the way that I got into JJ was probably slightly disingenuous. So I think I got him for like CMC, Alvin Kamara, Terry McLaurin, and like a random 26 first. And it was just like I packaged a bunch of shit together that scores points by all means. And that guy ended up making the final because Alvin Kamara and Terry McLaurin had great seasons. But realistically, all of us to say that I see how the league is kind of maneuvering and it has waves of not having a lot of activity. And I was hoping that if I move CeeDee Lamb and JJ in the offseason, it would basically spark the market in the right direction, because I do think that teams, unfortunately, in this league specifically, are very like resistant or hesitant to trade away future firsts. And it will have a lot of benefit if the league sees a more liquid environment for these picks. And so my hope is now that I have more firsts in this upcoming draft, I'm going to realistically trade them again to others so that other people can make their picks. This is what I did in the startup too. I drafted a bunch of firsts, traded them away, made my team pretty competitive in year one, and find different ways to get into assets that maybe I don't have a lot of or don't have a lot of exposure to. This isn't something that I necessarily would tell people to do in any other environment, because it's sure
I will not be doing this
because it sure as shit isn't. But like, I have found that it's incredibly hard to get off of even like a tear down from JJ. Like I've tried to tear down from him and Jamar Chase in a couple different leagues, and it's been borderline impossible. Like the plus that you're looking for is not the plus that you're going to get. And so you're basically stuck with these guys, which by all means is not a bad stuck to have. I'm not telling you that. It's just a very interesting phenomena to be sitting in. So, you know, like trying to go from JJ into even someone like Nico Collins, right? Like that for me would still be an additional probably early first and maybe even a second on top of it. And that just doesn't happen. Like I've tried things like that and it just doesn't work. And so I found that specifically for this league, it's a really great experiment. You won't see me do shit like this, like in League of Legends, for instance, where, you know, I have a relatively stacked wide receiver room and I already have, you know, a ton of future assets. Like everything is basically kind of like set. This team was relatively old because I was contending pretty hard in year one and didn't win. So I figured there's going to be a lot of great clear out for me. I was able to get out of Kelsey for a first. I was able to get out of Kittle and Lamb into Brian Thomas Jr. the first, and I believe a second and a fourth or something like that. And I'm just going to find ways to basically like help the fluidity and liquidity of this league. And if I have to do it by myself, I will, because I do think that it's better in these types of situations to be a facilitator of like the wealth rather than just like take people for them not being skillful. Because like I didn't want to be in this league to just be like, well, I beat a bunch of people who have never played Dynasty before. Like, fuck, I'm so smart. Like that doesn't really give me any type of excitement. But I will say, if it was like a true home league or something like that, maybe I would feel differently, because, you know, those are like all friends and you have a lot of like built up history with them, maybe from like redraft leagues that you've played in or whatever it might be. I don't necessarily have that with this group. And instead, I really just want it to be a positive environment for everyone to kind of learn and gather from. Because like, for instance, there's another owner within the league who happens to have Brock Bowers. And like, he's basically only requesting like 6,000 to 8,000 points on KTC bump on Brock Bowers' value as like the only way that he'll sell. But like he's acquiring in a lot of trade offers like some pretty excessive value, like things that you would probably agree to. So I think there was like one offer of, I don't remember what it was to say off the top of my head, but it was something along the lines of like 3 firsts basically for Brock Bowers, which is, I think, basically market. And he came back and was like, I want 2 firsts and Malik Neighbors. And it's like, I don't see how that's a feasible. Yeah, I don't believe that's like a feasible way to maneuver through this league. So hopefully, seeing players like CeeDee Lamb, seeing players like Justin Jefferson that are in and around the same tier, can hopefully get the juices flowing for others to kind of excel and start moving off of. And if that means that I have to take a hit for 1 to 2 years in the league, I'm okay with that. It really doesn't bother me all that much.
You're better than most of us. Very, very commendable strategy and activity that you're engaging in. That's something I don't think I could do, but I think that's very interesting, and you're gonna probably find some value from it as you work through it. And obviously, the league will be fun, so that's cool.
That's the most important part. I'm afraid of the league sucking, so I'm willing to impact the league to make it fun, and that's what's more important. And like, these aren't like massive value losses either. Like, let's call a spade a spade. They're just losses, right? Like, they're just general value losses. So
give me 1 second.
Sure. And I will talk through this last trade all by myself, because that will be pretty entertaining. This is also one of the perks of having a live show, is that you get moments like this. And so I just have to run solo monologues talking about how my cat eats too much food and she goes to the bathroom twice a day. I have to scoop it, things like that.
Oh my God. All right.
Last trade. We're almost there.
Okay. I heard something. I didn't know what it was. And now okay. It's the laundry. Don't mind me. Okay. That's just, I'm paranoid. I have PTSD from other stuff. That's not for the pod. Or, I mean, it could be, but it's just, not for today's pod. Okay. Michael Pittman for Jalen Wright plus the 206. This is a super interesting one. I'm not a big Michael Pittman fan. So, and I do think Wright is kind of destined for more of a role. I'd probably go the 206 in Wright, but it's really close. Like, I don't know if Michael Pittman is ever going to garner a first again, and like 206 is pretty good, like value plus Jalen Wright. Yeah, I do that. I think I would do that. What about you, Jake?
Yeah, I can see this going in both ways. I know that this was a counter to, what is that? Okay.
Lapisaurus, you said Oscar-worthy monologue when you were
spewing.
Yeah, and then AJ get something for Pittman while you can. Yeah.
And then he said #beta. It's weird to talk about yourself
not an alpha,
but that's okay. It's really strange. Like, I don't know why AJ calls himself a beta in public, but fair enough. I do think that this is an interesting trade. I know that this is a counter. I think the original offer was Jonathan Brooks plus the 206. The man who should not be named plus the 206 for Michael Pittman. But I think I liked the value more on that deal, funny enough, even though they probably hover around the same value on like KTC or whatever it might be. Maybe Brooks holds higher value just because he was a first in startup value. And so I think it's just really, really good. I don't know what to go with that emoji is.
That is a great emoji, though. I'll leave it up for a second.
Oh, all right. Well, just for that, you're now a Sigma. Anyway, oh, God, I don't like either side. And this is, shout out Lapisaurus. This is one of his trades that he did in one of his other leagues.
Shocker.
Yeah, just a true Lapisaurus.
This is a true Lapisaurus trade. So not shocked.
He has his. Did he at least guys.
Get the 206 side?
No, Michael Pittman, man. I don't know how to get him off of Michael Pittman, but he loves
Michael Midman. Michael Midman, come on.
Michael Betaman. Yeah, he is. He is unbelievable at going for his guys.
At the end of the
show. Yeah. My brain is absolutely scorched earth right now. But all I can say is that I don't want either side, and so therefore, whoever I am, I probably want like whatever I already had and would try and
Yeah.
do other things. Like if I had Pittman, I'm probably trying to package Pittman with something else.
For
If I
first,
have the 206 and Wright, I want to package that for
for
something else. So you know what? To each their own. They both lost potentially on this trade, I guess, is the best way to look at it.
Lapisaurus with a final comment of Michael Jordan Pittman. Yeah. Yeah, that
Spot on. Yep.
man, listen, you gotta have your guys. Everybody has their guys. I love it. I love it. Awesome. Jake, thank you for joining me for another really, really fun show. Um, I think as we head through the next couple months, you should probably all expect more prospect profiles, evaluations coming out. It'll be a little different than last year, probably how we kind of work through it and navigate those profiles, but a lot of the same, going over the film in depth, which we put a lot of time into, and going over all the numbers as well, and just the general profile. So keep a lookout for that. Hopefully getting it started next week, or the week thereafter. We'll still have other segments kind of along the lines of what we already do here, just talking general theory, strategy, and the absolute mental just madness that we all can come up with here for Dynasty Underdog. But that said, everybody who's not in the Discord, please find your way in there, reach out to us, find us on Twitter, all social medias. We're all about the same.
I'm on Blue Sky.
Yes, all social medias is what I'm talking about. We're all about the same handles, and you can find Jake at Jake Abrams on Blue Sky. You can find me everywhere at Willie Beeman FF, Uriah Dawkins, and the pod at Dynasty Underdog. Really appreciate everybody for joining us, and have a great week. We will catch you next time.